Hello, it's Deborah from the attic, and I'm just setting out the stamp sets and the 2 inks that I'm going to be using to make some cards. I'm going to be using a card size that is 6 inches by 6 inches. This is a size I don't usually use, but there is a reason why I am on this occasion. So the stamp sets are all from Cardio Cards. This one is called Festive Scene, and I've already put on my stubby acrylic blocks 2 of these tiny little deer. I'm also going to use this branch from the Oriental Blossom set, and from the Winter Bloom set I'm going to use this tiny little holly leaf, and I'm going to mount that onto another of the acrylic rods that you can get from Cardio Cards, and this time it's a little thin one, and it's ideal if you want to do lots of quick stamping and have the stamp going in different directions. I'm going to start with the branch from the Oriental Blossom stamp set, and I'm going to stamp it down once and then repeat stamp a couple of times till we have that shape at the top. Now I'm going to turn it so that it goes in a circular direction, and I'm going to go to the bottom of my card and stamp once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times at the bottom of my card. Again, turning my branch so that it goes in a circular direction, I'm going to stamp on the right once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And I'm going to complete the card by turning my stamp again, and on the left of the card stamp once, twice, 3, 4, 5 times. This is the reason that I'm using a 6 inch by 6 inch piece of card. This is a demonstration that I've seen Wendy Gage, who is the designer of the stamps used by Cardio Cards, do many times, but I don't think there is a video for it, and I think that's a shame because it's an absolutely brilliant technique. All we're going to do now is fill in the gaps in exactly the same style. So stamp once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And I'm going to go all the way around the card, filling in those blanks. It doesn't have to be too exact, don't try and make it too controlled, because the joy of this is that it looks natural. I've got a couple of little gaps here and here that I want to fill in. And perhaps one here. But what you don't want to do is overthink this too much, because that is a beautiful wreath, and it's the foundation for a number of cards that we can now create. I've got 2 colours of ink. I've got Marigold and I've got Rose Red. I'm going to use both of these, and I'm going to use a piece of scrap paper to cut a curve into. I'm going to keep this half of the curve, and I'm going to use it to decide where I want to put a little hill. I think I'll put my little hill about there. Now I've got a dry baby wipe. This is another technique that's used by Wendy Gage. I'm not claiming it as mine, this is hers, and it works beautifully well. So with my dry baby wipe, I'm going to take some of that Marigold colour, and I'm going to knock off that intensity onto my scrap card before I take it onto my design. And I'm very gently smudging it into the centre of my wreath. You can always add more colour, but it's very, very difficult to take colour away. I'm happy with that, and I'm going to take some of the rose red, and again I'm going to knock some of it off on my waste paper, because all I want is a tiny glow from this, and that's quite an intense red. You can see how much I've taken off, and I just want a glow, a very soft glow on my horizon. I'm going to add a tiny little bit more yellow because I want to blend in those two colours a little better. That's better. And when I take my sheet away, I've got a lovely white slope, and that represents snow. I've got my black archival ink, and I've got my two deer from the stamp set mounted onto stubby blocks, and I'm going to bring back in the piece of paper that I used for my little hill. I'm going to put it roughly back into position, and I'm going to stamp my deer as if they're just poking out of the top of that hill. I've taken their hooves just a little way over my scrap paper, as you can see, so it looks as if they are just hovering over the other side of that hill, looking at us. I want to introduce a little more colour, so I've got a green called Bamboo, which is a lovely, lovely colour, and I've got my tiny little holly leaf. Let me show you this. I want to make sure I've got that centred on my acrylic block, and I will show you this on our scrap paper. That's how tiny it is, but it's beautifully designed. It's got lovely flicks on those spiky bits of the leaf, and I'm using this to add some colour into the top, but it's not an intense green. I want it to be very subtle because I think this sort of evening sunset scene is very subtle, so I don't want a bold, brightly coloured green. And each time I place the stamp on my card, I'm moving it around. It's easy to really twist this around in your fingers so that you know you're not going to get a repetition. You're not going to be constantly stamping it in the same direction. The acrylic rod really helps you move it around the scene. That adds a lovely little halo of green around the scenery. These are beautiful stamps. I really can't recommend them enough, and I hope you can see that because it is a bit subtle. Now that we have our lovely wreath and we have our deer looking at the scene, I'm going to add some glue and some glitter. I've got a glue pen, and that's what I'm going to use to add some little dots on the top of my little hillside. Now, I've seen this done with sweeping lines, and you might want to do sweeping lines. I quite like it just with a shimmer of glitter at the top of the hill, like it's a really frosty hillside. And the glitter that I'm using is Deco Art, and it's called Glamour Dust. This is crystal. Some of it went onto the ink that we applied, but that's easy to knock off with a paintbrush, and it leaves it exactly where I want it, on my little snowy hillside. And that is my card complete. That's all I want to do to it. I want to keep it beautiful and simple and serene. I have a 6-inch square card where I've already stamped out the wreath, as we did in the earlier card, and I've got two colours here. I've got Neptune, which is a dark blue, and I've got Atlantic, which is a mid blue. I'm using 3 stamp sets. This one is called Winter Fun, and I'm using the little character here, the child bending down. I'm using mini tall trees, and I'm using one of the squirrels from the Starstruck collection. I'm going to begin with a sheet of scrap paper, and I'm going to cut a curve. I'm going to do 2 little layers of scenes in this card. I've got my dry baby wipe, and I'm going to start by adding the mid blue, the Atlantic. So I've knocked off that first strong colour onto my scrap paper, and I'm just adding it very, very gently to the inside of my wreath. Now I'm going to use the stronger colour. This is the Neptune. This is almost sort of a violet blue. I'm just going to concentrate that colour along the horizon. I don't want too much of that. Now I'm going to go back to my mid blue. I'm going to knock off that intense colour, and I'm just going to blend the darker blue with the lighter blue. Perfect. I lift that away. I've got a nice sort of twilight sky, perhaps. Now I'm going to do a different layer right at the bottom. I'm going to be using this stamp. This is Child Crouching Down, and I want to make sure that I have enough height on this. I don't want it to interfere with this hill here, so about there is right. I'm going to do exactly the same with my application of colours as I did above. I hope you can see that these cards are not too time consuming. They're actually quite quick to construct. That's a really intense colour. You can see how much I have to knock off onto my scrap sheet before I can add it. And I don't want too much of that because I'm not really giving the same sort of twilight as on my first band of colour up there, but I just need to distinguish that there is colour between the area behind where my child will be bending over and the area of snow below. So now I'm going to take my scrap paper to the first little hill that I created, and I'm going to add some of my mini tall trees just using plain black ink. We're going to create a little tree line. Oops. So this uses first, second, third stamping as we did with the wreath. I want to put a few up here as well. There we go. Don't want too many of these. And I want to make it look as if there are hills, there are forests disappearing off into the distance. I take that away nice tree-lined hillside. And I'm going to keep my scrap of paper for the next layer as well. This time I'm going to take my child bending down to make sure that I ink that up really, really well. I'm going to pop that there. I'm going to hold it in place. I'm going to give the ink plenty of time to go into the card. I want to make sure I stamp a really dark image. If I miss bits, if there's bits in there that are white, that's okay, because I can take a paintbrush and I can add ink into the places where it's needed. But hopefully I won't need to. Oh, not bad, not bad. Let me show you that paintbrush technique anyway, because it is quite useful to know about. So there's my paintbrush. I'm just going into my ink pad and I can use it just to fill in these little gaps here. I'll take my scrap card away because I don't want to get too much of that on my hand, because then the risk is that I'll drag it onto my card, and I don't want to do that. Oops. That helps. Now the next thing that I want to add is my little squirrel. So I've got a squirrel here. I'm going to just do a little test stamp, because I don't know if I want him like that or if I want him standing up. If I want him standing up, because of the way his paws are, it looks as if he needs to lean on something. I don't have anything here for him to lean on, so I'm going to do him sideways on. Just a little bit curious. I wonder if I want my scrap paper back. I do. Just in case his paws go over the line. There he is. Looking all curious. I wonder if they will meet up. To finish my card off, I'm going to take my glue pen again, and I'm going to add little dots of glue just at the top of the hill so that it looks like there's frost. There we go. See if I can get that to sparkle on the camera for you. I think you can maybe see it there. In this card I'm starting with my lovely wreath again. I've got a Marigold, a Camellia and a Chateau Grey, and my VersaFine Onyx Black. I'm using two stamp sets. I'm using the stamp set called Winter Scene, and I'm taking this stamp here, which is the collection of little houses and a church. I've got that stamped up ready. I'm going to use a mask when I'm making this design. So my mask is made by, I've used this stuff, this is stamping mask paper, and I used it because I've had it for a little while and because this is a wide stamp. So what I did was I stamped onto the paper and then I cut it out. And what's useful about this is that it's got a slightly tacky reverse. So that means that when you put your mask down on your paper, it will stick. It's only a light tack, but it's just enough. Now if you don't have that paper, what I used to use for a long time was post-it notes. And I've looked at this, and when I looked at it originally I thought, oh, it's too big for my post-it note. Duh. I could have done it that way. So if you can get the post-it notes that have got the sticky all along the back, they do exactly the same job for you. So I've got my mask ready. I've got a piece of scrap paper, and the other thing that I'm going to use is a stamp set called Winter Wishes, and there's a little thin one here, At Christmas All Roads Lead Home, and that will work really nicely with the design that I'm going to do on this card. To begin with then, I'm going to take my scrap paper and I'm going to cut out a very slight curve. I don't want too much of a curve on this, and I'll show you why. I'm going to just check where I want my village to sit, I think probably about there. So taking that as my position, that means I want my hill to begin here. And the reason that it's only a slight curve is because when I stamp, I'm going to be, I want to catch all of the bottom of the village. That will become more clear when I actually go through the process. I've got my dry baby wipe, and this time I'm going to use Chateau Grey to add a little line to indicate a snow line. And I'm using Chateau Grey just as a point of difference, just to show you how the different colours look. I could have used the Hyacinth or the Atlantic, the blues and the slight violet colours that I've used in some of the earlier cards. So let's do something a little different. I need my snow hill to be wide enough to accommodate my stamp. And as always, I'm knocking off the first bit of the ink onto my scrap paper and I'm dragging it down onto my design. I don't want this to be too strong, and I want the bulk of the colour, the emphasis of the colour, to be exactly on this line here. Let's just see how that looks. That's fine. So now I'm going to bring in the lower half of my scrap paper. Remember, we always keep the two pieces because they work together. And I'm going to line that up. I'm just going to check that again. So this is where I can explain it better. If my curve was too extreme, then my village would look as if it was sitting on top of a curve. The curve wouldn't cover all of the lower part of the building. Because I've got this slight curve, when I stamp, I need to make sure that I don't have any of these walls sticking above my yellow paper. Let's see if I can stamp that up and show you exactly what I mean. I'm going to hold my inky block in place for a nice long time to give it plenty of time to connect with the paper and give us a very good impression. So I've got all of the base of the houses on the yellow scrap of paper. If my curve had been too extreme, that wouldn't have happened. And now it looks as if there's a little village just nestling behind a snow hill. So that's exactly what we wanted. The next thing is I'm going to use my mask. I'm going to position this exactly over my village, or hopefully exactly over my village. There we go. And I'm just going to use one of my scraps of paper just to knock some ink off. I'm using the Marigold. And now, because I'm using my mask, if I go over the top of this, it will colour up the skyline behind my little village without colouring my houses. And because this spire is quite tall and thin, I'm being very careful about how I distribute the ink, and I'm actually working from the centre out. I'm going to take the colour, just drift the colour up towards the edge of my branches. It doesn't take an awful lot of ink, you don't need to keep reapplying, just a little bit will do. My red is very intense, I think I need to knock off a bit more of that. I went for a very small amount. I'm going to apply that in the same way. I'm just going to take it away from the centre, just smooth it away. And I'm going to concentrate on the middle section. So when I lift my mask away, my little village remains the same colour it was, but now it looks as if there's a lovely sunset or a twilight behind the village. All I need to do now to complete my card, or to complete the design I should say, is I'm going to take my sentiment, I'm going to take my plain black ink, and I'm going to put my sentiment in the centre of my wreath, hopefully centred under my village. We'll get the glue pen again, and I'm going to add a little row of glue on the brow of the hill. I'm going to add a little to the roof of the houses, maybe a little on the top of the steeple. Very twinkly. I'm going to reserve my mask as well because I can use this again. I've kept the paper that protected the stickiness on the back, and if I put it the right way around then I can add my mask back onto my protective paper, and what I do with these is I just slip them in the same packet as the stamp that they match. You can see I've got another mask, I did a couple, so I've got a couple of masks there ready. So whenever I want to do that, use that again and use masking, I'm all ready to go. For our final card, I've started with my wreath again, and this time I've kept the colours very monochromatic, so I've only used black to add a hint of a hill here for the stag, and a little hill here for the mother and the little stag, and for the trees at the back. I've also added my glue pen and glamour dust to to those hills so that they shimmer and shine a little bit. So the stamps that I used to create the deers is again from Cardio Cards. This one is called Deer Deer, and I used my mini tall trees for the trees at the back, and I used the two tiny little trees. I'm going to complete this wreath with more colour. One of the reasons why I've kept this so monochromatic is because with this final wreath I want to add a lot more colour to the outside of this, and I think if you have too much colour in here, if I had a sunset here and if I had my hyacinth or my Atlantic blue and lilacs to make these little hills, and then I added green and red to my wreath, it would be visually a little bit complicated for the eye, so I prefer to keep it simple. So if I'm going to have a brightly coloured wreath around the outside, I keep the centre very simple, and if I'm going to have a straightforward bare wreath around the outside, I know I can put lots of colour in the centre. To add my colour, I'm using two stamps from the Winter Blooms collection, and I've mounted them onto these little acrylic blocks. These are longer ones, and it's great because you can use them like pens. You can just stamp as if it's a little pen, and I've got holly on this end and I've got a flower on this side, and I'm going to just stamp these both up so you can see what they look like. So the holly one, it's got a lovely curve on the leaf, and the other one I'm going to use red for, and that's what that one looks like. So I'm going to add those to my wreath, and I'm using two different colours of green. Now I did this in the previous card when you weren't looking. I decided that I would add a little bit of colour around the outside, just the green, but two colours. So I've got a dark and I've got a lighter colour. and I think that mix is quite good. So I'm going to start with my light colour, and I'm going to work all the way around, and I'm going to just turn my little block or my little pencil with the stamp on the end, so that I know each time I stamp it down it's not going to be thought through, it's going to be random, and that's pretty much how a leaf would go. That gives me a nice splash of colour around the outside, and I'm going to finish this one off with some Nouveau Crystal drops. So once I've finished this card, I will show you all 4 of the cards together, because there are some differences between each of them that I want to highlight. Here are all 4 of our cards. Ignore this, I've put a little pot of paint there to hold the cards down, because this one particularly keeps flapping open, and I want you to be able to see them all together so you can make the comparison. So with this one, there's colour in the middle and the outside wreath is very plain. With this one, there's a single colour in the middle, and then there's a hint of green in the outside wreath. And then as we've gone on through the designs, they've become more sophisticated. So with this, again, there's only a single colour in the centre, and then there's a little bit more green with the 2 different colours of green going all the way around the wreath, whereas in this one it's only in the upper half of the wreath. And then in this one, the colours have gone back to very monochromatic, and there's more colour in the outside wreath. And you may or may not be able to see that I've added some Nouveau drops in gold, just sprinkled throughout the wreath. I wanted you to see the difference that the amount of colour that you have either in the centre or in the wreath itself makes to your final design. And I think this is absolutely gorgeous. And you could do the whole thing just in monochrome, you could do the whole thing in black. This here, these little hills, they've been picked out in black, with most of the black knocked off, so that when I actually came to use my little baby wipe, there was hardly any black at all on the baby wipe, and it's just enough to give a hint of a shape. You don't really want it to be terribly well defined. In this one it's very well defined, but that's okay because we have a sunset, and that's how a sunset would appear on the horizon, whereas with this it's a little bit more misty. So I wanted you to see all 4 together so that you can see how the different colours that you choose can impact your design. So for me, because I don't like visual nightmares, I've gone with, if I know I want colour in the wreath, then I've gone simple in the centre, and the other way around with colour in the centre and a simple wreath if I know I don't want to do anything to the outside. So these have all been made using Cardio Card stamps. I'm not affiliated to them in any way, they don't give me produce or anything like that. I'm sharing their stamps with you because I'm a massive fan. I think what they do is beautiful. I love Wendy Gage's design. I think she's got such an eye for style. And I hope that this will encourage you to have a little look and see what you think of their stamps, and maybe give some of them a try as well if you can get a hold of them. So I provided links as far as I can in the video, or sorry, below the video, so you'll find them if you look down under the video, you'll find the links there. And I'm going to leave you with some close-ups of all of the cards that we've made today, and until we meet again, take care.